Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have a completed sweater that I want to share with you, and I want to tell you about my trip to the Netherlands and some of the really fun and cool textile-related things that I did on my trip. So let's get started. So I want to start the podcast with this completed sweater. It was mostly done before I went on my trip, and I worked on it on my trip, and then I finished it yesterday. We got back on Monday afternoon. Today is Thursday. I'm recording this early because I'm going on another trip tomorrow for a long weekend to see my old college buddies and spend a long weekend with them. So this is completed, and I want to tell you about it. I'll do the headless version of me so you can see this better and talk about this sweater and what I think of it, and I will also model it for you. All right, so this is a modification of Isolde Teague, who is the designer. Her sweater pattern called Ravelston DK. I'll leave a link down below. There is just plain old Ravelston sweater also that's for fingering weight. So those are two different patterns. So this is for the DK weight, and then she's got a separate one for the fingering. And her pattern is designed to be completely in stockinette, and I just can't knit a plain solid stockinette sweater without losing my mind. So I needed to add a stitch pattern. I talked about that last time. I did need to really think through balancing the stitch pattern, vertically, and also I wanted to chart out the whole front body and the back too, but the front body with the scoop and where the shaping was to make sure that I knew what I wanted to do for maintaining the stitch pattern as best I could. And just to be able to visually see what was going on. Okay, the yarn I'm using is called Winterburne DK. It's from Baa Ram Ewe. It's a company in the UK. The yarn has been discontinued. It's a blend of 50% Blue Face Leicester, 25% ecru massum, and 25% dark brown massum. It's a nice yarn. I really liked it. It's a 2-ply yarn, which is the reason one of the reasons I went with a lace pattern. Tends to work well for that. Things like cables or other knit purl patterns really do well with a rounder yarn that has 3 plies or 4 plies. So lace works well with a 2-ply. There's 2 options for the neck. This one is the scoop neck. There's also a V-neck. It's not a deep V-neck. It's a V-neck that's probably very similar to this one. And what intrigued me about this pattern, it has, I would call it asymmetrical shaping. It's not asymmetrical from left to right. It's asymmetrical from front to back. And I talked about that in quite a bit in the last Casual Friday as well. This is meant to fit with no ease at the bust. So whatever your bust measurement is, that's what it's meant to fit. And you get your size by measuring your high bust, which is under your underarms, and you measure across above your actual bust. And if your full bust is more than 2 inches larger than your high bust, then you can use her instructions for various different cup sizes. And it's not your bra cup. It's cup, meaning it's a B cup if you're 2 inches bigger than your high bust. It's a C if it's 3. It's a D if it's 4. That's what cup sizes are in clothing and knitting. It's not your bra cup size. So keep that in mind. This is meant to fit exactly at the bust, and that isn't a tight fit. It's because knitting also stretches. So it's not stretching to fit your bust. It just fits your bust. The hips are bigger around than your bust. And so it gives you a little more room down here, which is helpful, especially if you're wearing it over the top of your pants and you need that extra circumference. And so where the asymmetry in the shaping comes is that when you're doing your waist shaping on either side, you're doing it in the front and the back half, but you're also doing the shaping in the center back here, so that it's matching that curve in the back of the hips, so to get a better fit. So then once you've done all of that decreasing, you have the same number of stitches on the front and the back. Then you do your increases, your waist increases, the same on the front and the back. You're not doing them in the center back at all. You're done with that. And then when you're done with the waist increases, you continue increasing only on the front to do some bust increases, because that's where your bust is. So your booty's in the back, so they have more room back there, and then your boobs are in the front, and so they give you more room up there. That's some of the asymmetry, and some of the other asymmetry is that the front is maybe an inch or so longer than the back, so that the seam is just not quite at the very top center of the shoulder, but just very slightly back. So this is a little bit longer, and this is more rounded in the shape too, because when you tend to reach your arms forward, not backwards, so you need kind of more room there. And this is something they do in woven fabric garments, but haven't really seen it much. I've seen it very rarely. I saw it once in the 1920s in a sweater pattern that was meant to follow dress pattern construction. Usually, you know, sweaters have enough ease, or it's stretchy enough that you don't have to worry about that. And so I wasn't convinced that this was necessary, but I wanted to know if I would like it better. So this is a little bit longer than the back. You still pick up the same number of stitches. So you're picking up, you know, the ratio is different than what you would expect. You pick up about I did pick up 1 stitch for every row in the back. I skipped maybe 1. And then in the front, I was thinking it was going to be 3 to 4, but it was actually 4 to 5. So for every 5 rows, I picked up 4 stitches. So it's a lot more than you would normally pick up along a vertical edge, and certainly more than you would normally pick up for a short row sleeve cap, the way that they're usually done. And then as you work your sleeve cap back and forth, it's symmetrical right at the top, but then as you start going back and forth, you're also doing a decrease. Sometimes you just go 1 stitch past where you had done your turn previously. Usually that's what you're doing on the back, very consistent on the back. On the front, it varies. Sometimes it's 1 stitch past, sometimes it's no stitches past, sometimes it's 2 stitches past. It just depends on what's needed to get that shape in the front. So you start with the same number of stitches and you end with the same number of stitches, but you're just doing different things at the short row turns on the front than you were doing on the back. And that's what I wanted to see, is it worth that extra concentration and effort, and would I be able to, after I had worked through this, understand it well enough to take this technique and apply it in a situation where I was working a different size, or more likely just with a different gauge, because I usually only knit sweaters for myself. So that's what I was interested in, is how is this going to actually fit my body, and am I going to like it better? And is it going to be because I just actually went with no ease, or is it going to be because these details are just better than what I have done before? So let me put this on and I'll model it for you, and then you guys can decide what you think. I do think that the length is fine. I am used to sweaters being just a little bit longer. And I think this hip shaping might actually fit me a little bit better if it was longer, so that it would be matching the curve of my hip a little bit better. So that's something that I would watch out for in the future, is making sure that whatever stitch pattern I picked, the row gauge was actually what I was expecting, so that I could plan all the shaping out. But otherwise, really no complaints about the sweater. I really like the way it fits a lot. I think I really do prefer a closer fitting sweater. Now, if you didn't want the waist shaping, or at least as much waist shaping as this has, you could say, no, I want something that goes straight, or you might decide you want to have, more stitches around the bottom and maybe just do those decreases up the back. You'd have to figure out what works for your body. For my body, this seems to work really well. And for the fit that I wanted with this sweater, I'm really happy with it. If I wanted a more relaxed sweater, maybe with a little bit more ease, I don't know that I would bother with this asymmetrical shaping. I don't know. Several of you have mentioned that, I always do asymmetrical shaping on the sleeve caps because I sew. And I'm just curious about how you do that, what your approach is, how you're drafting your sleeve caps, or how you're deciding to do that. I'd be really curious about that. But again, I'm really happy with the result of this sweater, and I would definitely use this silhouette again. But the big challenge with having those decreases up the back is that they're placed, I placed them right on either side of that panel. That panel is the width it is because that's where those decreases need to be, on the outside of the panel. If you want to use a stitch pattern, you have to think about that stitch pattern and what you want it to look like once all of that shaping is done, and then kind of work backwards to figure out what's it going to look like when I start, so that you're eliminating a little triangle of fabric that isn't going to ruin the overall stitch pattern. So this would be really hard to do on the back, I think, with an overall stitch pattern, unless it was something like seed stitch, which only has a 2-stitch repeat. So it's very easy to eliminate stitches and to, keep the pattern maintained over time. So those are just things to think about. And you can always just do a stitch pattern on the front and keep the back in stockinette. Or you could work the whole thing in stockinette if you can stand to do that. But I thought this was a really worthwhile experiment, and I'm really happy with this result. So here's what I mean about that cap shaping being asymmetrical from front to back. You start picking up stitches at the very top of the center of the cap. You go all the way around, and then once you come around, you work 6 stitches across, turn, slip that stitch, work back 6 stitches past the top of the cap, turn and slip again, and you come back to where that slip stitch is and you decrease it together with the stitch next to it, and then you work 3 more stitches, and then you turn and slip, work back to where that slip stitch is, work the slip stitch together with the next stitch. This is like a heel turn of a heel flap and gusset sock, except that you're working more than 1 stitch after you work your decrease. So that's the very top, so that it's symmetrical on both sides. But then you get to where this is the back of the sleeve. So it's very similar at the edge, regardless of what row you're on, but on the front you see there's this different shaping. So on the front of the cap you're working your decrease and 2 more stitches, but when you come over here you work your decrease and only 1 stitch. So you're working fewer stitches past the cap at this point. So you're working more on this side, but then later you get into a straighter part where you might be working 1 stitch after the decrease, or no stitches after the decrease. So you're working fewer stitches over here on the whole, but over here it stays consistently the same. And then you get to where you've got 2 after the decrease on this side, but only you continue to have just 1 after the decrease over here. So it's in the front where the number of stitches you're working after your decrease really changes, because that's the part of the cap that needs to have this shaping. But you start out with the same number of stitches on both sides. You have the same number of short row turns and the same number of decreases, and you end up with the same number of stitches. It's just that they're not worked the same on the front and the back. So I charted this out for, this is the right sleeve cap, because this would be the back of the right side and the front of the right side of the body. But for the other sleeve cap, this would all be reversed. So this would be the front and this would be the back. So the shaping would be reversed on this. So this is what I really needed to work through myself. Like, I needed to chart it out so that I could see what was going on rather than just following the written instructions, which I could have gotten lost in, especially in this part right here. And then actually work through it and realize, oh, I started out with the same number of stitches, I ended with the same number, I had the same number of decreases. It's just that this has a really consistent rate of movement and this one is different. And I needed to do that in order to understand in the future, if I wanted to apply this to something I was designing myself, how I would do that. So we went to Amsterdam. We just, today is Thursday. I'm filming this a day early. So we just got back on Monday. We were there for a solid 2 weeks. We were really excited about this trip. My husband had been learning Dutch on Duolingo for the past 2 years, and listening to anytime I go on a trip, whether it's a road trip, an airplane trip, domestic, international, I start a new pair of socks cast on when I get to the airport. And so that's what I did this time. I had this yarn. I've lost the label. It's a Regia 6-ply. No idea what the colorway is. No idea. And I've got about 1.5 socks done. So I got this one done, and then I have the leg of the second one, and I just started the heel flap. So I got 1.5 socks done. So I was happy with that. I do like to go to yarn shops when I travel somewhere, just to see what the yarn shops are like. And sometimes I'll buy like a souvenir ball of sock yarn if the shop carries something like that, or if there's something unusual that you can only get from them. That's really, really local. I'll try to think of something that I could make with something that they have there, whether it's a hat or a pair of socks, or, you know, depending on what it is the yarn shop have. But I really wasn't planning on buying any yarn. Like, I didn't have like a list of yarns that I wanted to shop for when I was in the Netherlands. Nina my daughter used to work at Stephen and Penelope, so I'd been there several times. I was very familiar with what kind of yarns they have, and they're nice yarns, but I'm just not, it's not the kind of yarns that I necessarily am looking for. I don't do his make-alongs. I don't care for superwash yarns. I mean, he carries a lot of other yarns too, but it's just, you know, I'd been there and I wasn't like looking for anything. So that wouldn't have been something new to learn about. He's in a new location than last time, but that wasn't really particularly interesting to me. Nina had gone to Copenhagen at the end of August, and it was specifically to go on a yarn shopping trip. She wanted to go to Copenhagen, and then she thought, while I'm there, I'll be able to get these Danish yarns that you can get in the Netherlands, but maybe not the full breadth of them that you could get there in Copenhagen. So she asked me, you know, is there anything I want? I'm like, I have no idea what to even ask for. So she gave me like the brand name suggestions, and I went and looked at the website, and I found a yarn I really liked, and then I'm like, you know, this color, or this color. So it was a DK weight, and there was some beautiful deep jewel tones because a lot of the yarns had kind of, you know, beige and oatmeal and gray, those really neutral tones that I like. They don't suit me, and I'm not interested in knitting in those colors. But there were some that had some beautiful colors. She could not find the DK weight. And she probably went to 4 or 5 different yarn shops. She could not find the DK weight that's listed on their website, but they did have a fingering weight version. When we got to the Netherlands, we went to her apartment and we had to wait to check in to our hotel. So she gave me the yarn that she got for me. It's Dansk Pelsild, and it's 8.2 is the yarn weight. That's how they describe a fingering weight. She got me 4 skeins of this. So this is beautiful kind of plum color, which I love. Don't knit a lot of fingering weight sweaters, so it's going to take me some time to figure out what I want to make with this. If anybody has any suggestions, I'm not looking for a pattern by a Danish designer. I'm just looking for something to knit with fingering weight yarn. I like a stitch pattern. Don't love top-down seamless constructions, but if I have to do that, it needs to be set-in sleeves, not a yoke, not raglan. You know, I don't care for those. I prefer set-in sleeve because I like the way set-in sleeve fits. So if you have some fingering weight sweater suggestions that are set-in sleeve, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear. So I was happy with this yarn. I was not going to be like shopping for any other yarns. Like I said, I'd been to Stephen and Penelope in Amsterdam, so, you know, what was I going to go shopping for? Well, I was also going to be teaching a workshop on October 15th on kind of my study of this evolution of socks and stockings that I've been doing the past few years. I've knit stockings from various centuries and different decades in the 20th century as people transition from stockings into socks. So I was going to be teaching that, and I was going to also be teaching at the end of the workshop. There was going to be some presentation about the history. There was going to be all the stockings that I had knit, and then as well some actual 19th century stockings that I either own or were lent to me. And my friend Chris, who has her great-grandmother's stockings from 1890, who immigrated from Germany to get married here, she had her stockings, and I replicated one of those pair by actually studying those stockings. So Chris, when she found out I was teaching the workshop, she's like, "Oh, you want to take the stockings with you, the original ones?" I'm like, "Are you kidding?" And she's like, "No." And she goes, "Do you want the blue ones too?" Because the ones that I replicated, they were these stockings, and I didn't know until I was studying the photographs after I knit the first one that these two stockings are not actually the same. They have different lace patterns at the top, but they were made with the same yarn. They had her initials in beads, same kind of heel, same kind of tension. We realized, you know, later that, oh, these are either from 2 different pairs, or she was a quirky lady who didn't like knitting the same thing twice. So we were speculating had been her wedding stockings, or at least one of them might have been, or maybe they were in her trousseau or something like that, hope chest or something. But there were these other stockings that she had too that are more like regular everyday stockings. They also have lace at the top, and they had been repaired a lot more than the others, which you can see here. They had been repaired with commercial parts of a commercial socks. Like she had cut off parts of like the sock toe of a commercial sock and sewed it onto her stocking, and then wore them so much that they had to be darned as well. And you can see in here how she replaced part of the heel in there with another sock, and then, you know, sewed them together. And she let me take these with me overseas for this workshop. But at the end of the workshop, I was going to be teaching a technique from the sock that started the whole project that I had reverse engineered. It was another person who had socks that had been knit by a relative, and the relative had taught her how to knit these while she was on a semester abroad in Norway, and that relative is dead now. And this person was trying to replicate these socks. I couldn't remember how to do the heel, and I reverse engineered it because it was very unusual. It was an amazing technique. So I was going to be teaching that technique at the end of the workshop. And so the students needed to do homework. They had to buy the yarn and do the sock leg, which is a bunch of knit 2 purl 2 ribbing and a little bit of stockinette heel flap, and then be ready for the class. So Nina was looking for some yarn that would be appropriate. She had some in her stash, but it was, you know, she had 4 skeins and she didn't want to break up the 4 skeins. And so she said, well, I want to go to Utrecht to a yarn shop there. And like, oh, great, because we want to go to Utrecht and see it, because it sounds like it's a cute, you know, college town, and it would be fun to go visit there. So we got to the train station. In order to get out of the train station on foot, you have to go through a gigantic shopping mall. And so you feel like you're in the US because you just walk into this endless shopping mall. And then you go through the doors, and then there's this beautiful, charming European city. And with more shops and restaurants, only much cuter. And so we walk through there and we get to this shop, and we were there to get Nina yarn. I was interested in the yarn shop, but there's nothing I had on my mind that I wanted to buy. I didn't have a project in mind that I wanted to shop for or anything. And we go in there, I'm like, this is a cute little shop. And then I see Nina turn this corner, and I'm like, where is she going? There's a whole nother room. It's a nice, big yarn shop. I think she carries everything of the entire Lang yarn brand, like every yarn they have, and then in every color. Whatever yarn she had it in a million colors. And what I noticed in that first room was that she had a bunch of Lang sock yarn, 4-ply sock yarn in 50-gram balls. And I was like, oh man, that is so hard to get here in the US. I have a bunch of Regia solids that I bought, but they're getting harder right now just because of the way things are here in the US with imports. I saw some colors that I just loved. So I bought myself 2 pairs of socks worth. So this is a kind of a bluer red, which is my favorite kind of red. And then this magenta, beautiful magenta color. And then I saw she had Lang alpaca socks. So it's 70% alpaca and then 30% nylon. Again, in a, you know, is there a trend going on here? So I'm like, oh, that's great. So I'm just holding this yarn that I wasn't expecting to buy. We go into the other room, and then there's all this 6-ply sock yarn. And 6-ply sock yarn is what I use for my brother and for Sam, Nina's fiance. And I had just knit my brother a pair of socks this summer, and really could have used some contrast yarn for the heels or toes, because his feet are so big, and in order to make the socks long enough into the legs so that they're not, you know, shorty socks on him, I really have to use all the yarn, and then the heels and the toes don't really quite match each other because I just trying to use as much of the yarn as I could. So I kept wishing I could get some 6-ply solid sock yarn, and it's really hard to get even when the import issues are not a problem here. And so I see this room and all this 6-ply sock yarn. I bought 1 ball of self-striping Lang super socks, and then I got some solids. So I got a navy, a gray, and a kind of a forest green, which I think are nice neutral colors that can be used in a lot of the socks that I am likely to knit for him. I could use this right here for this pair. She went out of there, I think, with a ball of yarn. I went out there with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 balls of yarn when I had intended to buy nothing, because I was just so thrilled to be able to find to find this kind of shop. I was just loved the shop. I thought it was so great. So I was very happy. And then we went to a museum there over by the college, had a lovely lunch, just delightful. We loved Utrecht. So I did my workshop on Wednesday, October 15th. And I haven't taught in person with live people in person for, I think, 6 years. I have done some Zoom presentations like for different knitting guilds in the past 5 or 6 years, but that's not the same. You're not seeing, you know, how people are reacting to what you're saying. And those were presentations. There wasn't any like hands-on teaching in those, and they were limited to about an hour. This was going to be a 3-hour workshop, so it's going to be part presentation, part passing around the stockings I had made or the 19th century stockings that I had in my possession, and then some hands-on teaching. A little nervous about that, but you know, I got there early for setup and, you know, chatting and all this. And, you know, once I'm around other knitters, like I just relax. I'm like, they're just other knitters. They're sitting there, they're knitting just like me. And I'm just here to talk to them about this. So the workshop was really fun. And I realized how much I do miss teaching in person. I get a little bit of one-on-one teaching when I go to knitting groups and somebody has a question, but I really enjoyed seeing what people were getting in the moment versus what they weren't, and being able to answer questions, and then realizing, okay, if I was going to do this again, I would preface this, you know, I just, you know, understanding how, you know, what to think about the next time around. So I have to figure out, you know, what that means teaching in person again, what that means to me, what I would want to teach in person, how I would do that, to what extent I would do it, that sort of thing. One of the things that I talked about in this workshop were some of the really fancy stockings that the aristocracy wore in like the 17th, 18th, you know, centuries. These hand-knit silk stockings that were like 20 stitches an inch that came from like Spain or southern Italy. The really fine, high-level knitting workmanship. And I showed photographs of those. And it's not in my aspiration to try to replicate stockings like that. My project is really about replicating things that real people wore, you know, real people, you know, who were repairing their socks in different ways, and you know, we're knitting for function and practicality, and not so much for status. But I've always wanted to see, you know, some of those stockings in person instead of just seeing a photograph on the internet. The day after the workshop, we took a trip to Texel, which is, I think it's the largest of what are called the Frisian Islands, if I'm not mistaken, just off the north coast of mainland Netherlands. There's this chain of islands, and they extend across, I believe, you know, northern Germany. There's a type of sheep called a Texel sheep, which I find to be amongst the homeliest sheep breeds. Their face kind of looks like a cow. Texel is known for the fact that there were tons of shipwrecks around there. It used to be a place where they did shipbuilding and ship repairs, and where, you know, it was like part of the trade route to go through there. The ships were, if they were full of cargo, were too heavy to come into Amsterdam. And so that would be the main place where things would get unloaded or reloaded or things like that. And so because there were so many ships there and the weather could be unpredictable, there were a lot of shipwrecks. And a few years ago, there is the Palmwood wreck. When they find a wreck, they name it after some aspect of either the cargo or something. And I think this ship was made of palmwood or something. I think that's what it was. But what was amazing about it was the amount of textiles that they recovered that were in amazing condition. And so that was, I wanted to go see Texel because I wanted to go to the shipwreck museum. It's called the Museum Kaap Skil, and see the textiles. I couldn't have been more thrilled. They had two beautiful gowns. One was like probably a wedding gown that had been with all of the silver thread in it. And another one was probably something like a wedding guest would have worn. Beautiful condition and displayed in these cases. But there was another display case that had a pair of silk stockings. And I couldn't have been more thrilled to have my nose, you know, glass between me and the stocking, but to be able to just stand there and look at them and see what they actually look like and how tiny those stitches were, and just be amazed being able to see those in person. That was a real highlight. We did see some Texel sheep, like we're driving along in our, it's called the Texel hopper. It's like a van taxi type of thing. We're driving along, oh, there's sheep. And I was looking at them, and like there were Texel sheep. So that was really great. Well, we came out of the museum, and across the street was this store that sold wool products. And none of them are made from Texel wool, and they are not made in the Netherlands, but it's all wool stuff, and we just went in there to look. We get out of there, and it isn't until later that we realized that next door to the museum, which we hadn't seen because we walked out of the museum, and it was to our right, but we would have had to turn around to see it. Next door to the museum was a yarn shop. And so I'm like, I'm going into a yarn shop. Again, no plans to buy anything because I don't need anything. She has tons of yarn made from Texel wool. So I think it's her own brand. She's got all different yarn ways, a bunch of different colors of, you know, natural colors, and in different yarn weights. And I was trying to figure out, you know, what would I buy with for a DK or a fingering weight? You know, I was trying to figure out, and then I saw she had sock yarn. So this is it. It's called De Witt Teyler. So the woman who runs the shop, her last name is Witt. The name of the shop is called Tatataa. So it's T-A-T-A-T-A-A and then ... And the explanation for that is that when you are finished with a project, whether it's knitting or crochet, that what you do is go ta-ta-da! And so that's why she called it, that's the name of the shop. So this is, I think 75% Texel wool and then 25% nylon, which is great because then I don't have to try to reinforce it. It's not superwash, again, totally fine. I love this kind of gray. You can see some natural white kind of mixed in there too. So I'm going to have to figure out what sort of texture pattern I can knit with this and in this gray color. So I have a lot of solid color sock yarns that I bought on this trip, completely unplanned, but I'm very happy about it. So I'm really happy. This is the kind of yarn that I love to get. It's souvenir yarn and it's sock yarn, and so that I'll be able to remember that, and it'll just be a nice memory of that trip. But Texel, loved it. I was very happy to go to the Shipwreck Museum, and everyone, the whole family was there, and they all really liked it too. But I just can't get over seeing those perfectly pristine, probably discolored by age, being in the water for 400 years, but in just perfect condition, like no holes, nothing. It's just amazing. I was so happy to be able to see something like that finally after all these years. So I think that is it for the yarn on my trip. We went to other towns. We went to Zaandam, and we went to the Zaans Museum. Zaandam is known for its industry. At one time they had 635 windmills that were powering sawmills and grain and oil and chocolate. Like the whole place smells like chocolate. They still have all these factories there. Just over time they switched from windmill power to steam to electricity and, you know, all of that sort of thing. Big center for chocolate production though, which was amazing to learn about. And one of the things that was so interesting about it is that there were a lot of wooden houses there because they had all this wood that was shipped there that would get processed by the sawmills that were run by the windmill power. And what the people noticed, because you know that Netherlands is a damp climate, and most of the places in the Netherlands, they don't have wooden houses, that when they used green paint, which had copper in it, that really protected the homes against the elements. And so that became the traditional color. Even when copper is no longer used for green paint, you see these green, and sometimes blue, but mostly green, and then sometimes blue wooden houses there, and which is really different from what you see in other towns in the Netherlands. We also went to, it's called, the short name for it is Den Bosch, and that has a big cathedral there. And so we went and looked in the cathedral, and you know, it's, I don't know, 800 years old or something. And so they're always, you know, repairing the roof or doing all of this refurbishing. And as they were refurbishing the angels, the person who was doing it did a new angel that is a modern angel. So she's wearing jeans and she's holding a cell phone that has one button, which is the direct line to God, apparently. So that was a cute thing. It was you know, every town has its own little personality. It's so interesting. And I just love walking through these towns, and it's just like one shop, one restaurant after another. And then there's homes there and people on their bicycles, and there's just very limited numbers of cars. So that's it. That was my trip to the Netherlands. And like I said, I'm off for another trip tomorrow. But thank you for joining me. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.